Okay, welcome everybody to the inaugural edition of the Near Memo, which is a weekly conversation among the three of us about events of the week in search, social, and commerce. I'm Greg Sterling. I am pleased to be the editor of Near Media, and joining me today are Mike Blumenthal and David Mim, my collaborators and co-conspirators. And you guys want to say something a little bit about yourselves? Not that you need any introduction.
I'm just excited to be finally working with the two of you on a project together.
All right, as am I.
Likewise. I was about to say age before beauty, but Mike jumped in before I could even get that out. So as usual, Mike gets the first word.
And the last.
All right, so what we've decided here is we're each going to go around and reflect on a development, a news item, something that happened this week in this broad range of technology news, and have a discussion about it, and we'll see how it goes. So why don't we start with you, Mike Blumenthal?
So the piece of news that really sort of caught my eye this week, sort of running in the shadow of Jeff Bezos' big announcement that he was moving from CEO to chairman of the board, and surprisingly, if not suspiciously released on the same day, was the fact that Amazon had been fined by the FTC for $66 million for stealing tips from their workers from 2015 through 2019, contrary to what they had promised the workers. And they didn't stop until the FTC actually started investigating it. And I know that in our newsletter, you noted it, that it was this sort of Bondian villainous Bezos, but I thought of it more like, here's a capitalist doing what capitalists do, trying to get away with things by exploiting the lowest flex worker in the chain of delivery, and only sort of coughing up once they got caught. And I see it as a systemic problem. This is something that DoorDash and Instacart and every one of these other guys have done. And I see it as a systemic problem in our society that largely lets these companies run unregulated.
Well, let me clarify the Bond villain headline, because that was prompted by a picture that I saw somewhere. I don't know the source of it now, that showed Jeff Bezos in '94 when he just had founded Amazon, and he's kind of this nebbishy guy, thin guy. And then I saw the picture of him, more recently. And he's really jacked now, and he's got this vest, and it's all in black, and he's bald. And I thought, this guy is a Bond villain now. He's become, and he's got the space, SpaceX. I forget which one is Musk's and which one is Blue Orb or whatever the hell his space company is. But that's why I wasn't saying he's a Bond villain because he's stealing from his own drivers. I'm saying just because he's transformed himself into this kind of, figure. But what was mystifying to me about this item, the FTC fine, is like, why they don't need to do this? I mean, it's not like they're a small company that needs to show revenue growth. Like that. What is the possible motivation for ripping these people off? It's insignificant to Amazon itself.
Right.
Totally. $1.7 trillion company, right?
I mean, I was totally mystified.
It's 0.801% of quarterly revenue or something like that. So yeah.
It is totally mystifying, and yet it seems to be a standard in our industry, and it happens over and over and over again, whether it's Uber or DoorDash or Grubhub or one of these others. And in the absence of firm and consistent high-level regulation, I guess it will continue to happen just because it can. And why leave $66 million on the table? And why not take it from the flex driver who is working 3 jobs and sleeping in his car at night?
I mean, I guess the system rewards, profit maximization or shareholder value maximization, but it's crazy, and it's kind of horrible. I mean, this is true. This sort of phenomenon seems to be, as you're pointing out, I think, true across many of these companies. but what was also striking to me is that Bezos is trying to present himself as a benevolent figure, a philanthropist. He's got the Bezos, Earth Initiative, whatever it's called, and trying to do good things at the corporate level. And yet this kind of stuff is going on, and it's true for Google and it's true for Facebook. They're all touting, this is Black History Month, and they're all touting, their Black-owned business initiatives and supporting Black entrepreneurs, and at the same time they're doing all these things which are very, very questionable ethically. The example of Google ousting the AI expert, her name is escaping me right now, who's African American, I believe.
Yeah, it's the Gilded Age reincarnate. I visited Johnstown last year, the site of the world's horrendous flood caused by the industrialists of the area from Pittsburgh wanting a Adirondacks-like park in the hilltops above, so they built a dam poorly. It broke. Everybody died. No responsibility. And yet they all went on, many of these, like Frick and the others, went on to become major philanthropists to recover their name in history, even if not in reality.
So, David, why don't we go to you?
One last point I want to make on this before we leave. It's just the amazing timing to me of the Bezos move. I found it fascinating that they were able to announce it on the exact same day that the FTC released the news. And I don't, I am not a conspiracy theorist. I just think it was an incredible PR maneuver to have this buried in the news.
So on that note, I'm not somebody who indulges in conspiracies that often, but I think there's a way in which this is about PR, because apparently Bezos has really not been running day-to-day operations for a long time.
Right. So why announce on the same day the FTC is?
And he's not leaving the company. He's just sort of taking this higher level role where he's going to focus on strategic projects. So in a sense, nothing is changing as a practical matter. So in one way, it is our PR maneuver, likely, in all likelihood.
Over to you, David.
All right. So there wasn't necessarily a single story that caught my eye the last week or so, but a series of stories, starting with the acquisition of Review by Twitter, which is a newsletter platform not entirely dissimilar to my own newsletter platform, Tidings, which was acquired by Demand Science this week. And then also Facebook announcing that they were going to start to, well, actually they didn't announce it. It was released. It came out that they're developing newsletter tools for journalists, and Review's primary audience is also journalists, which is a little bit different than Tidings, which is geared around small businesses, and inside of Demand Science will be geared at B2B companies specifically. But I think all three of these things, kind of combined, I feel some vindication for my thesis a few years ago that social media is not necessarily the best place for a business to be communicating with its customers, that there's so much happening sort of in the stream that you don't get the sort of dedication of attention, number one, and that you don't own your audience the same way that you do with an email platform. So, I think that email has long been sort of abandoned by a lot of less sophisticated marketers, and it's still one of the most powerful channels out there, and one that everyone should be taking advantage of. And Twitter and Facebook and to a much lower level, Demand Science invested in that this week. Put their dollars where their sort of strategic vision is. So.
Do you think Substack will be impacted by this? I mean, Substack was...
Well, it was interesting. I don't know if you guys saw, but their CEO came out with a couple of snarky tweets saying, oh, this is, GM deciding to build the Bolt, but then Tesla is, over here on the side taking their lunch. I do think Substack will be impacted. I'm certainly impressed with, have been impressed with Review's platform. And I think in the hands of a company as large as Twitter, which has the same audience as Substack, I would certainly be feeling the heat a little bit over there. And that's not to say that there isn't a place. I mean, I think with any sophisticated technology product, I think there's going to be there's just going to be certain customers for whom a particular product is better suited for or not. And so I think, to the extent Substack can find where that gap is, we certainly have seen Twitter execute very poorly on small business oriented products in the past. And, they by all indications seem to be much more interested in journalists as a customer base. So maybe that won't be the case here, but I don't know that it's going to, put Substack out of business or anything, but I think they're certainly seem to be targeting the same customer set.
And it's half the price for a paid subscription. I think it's 5% versus Substack's 10%.
And Twitter's even dropping what Review had been charging. So yeah, it's getting even cheaper.
Right, and free for anybody who isn't charging for the newsletter. So it's a pretty competitively priced.
So that's what caught my eye this week. I just call it the resurgence of email, but however you want to frame it, but email is still one of the top performing channels, and everyone should be doing it. And one of the reasons that we launched Near Media as a newsletter first company, we all three of us, I think, really believe in the power of newsletters. So
absolutely. And at Gather Up, when I was tasked with targeting progressive agents, which are notoriously hard to circle into a crowd, email was the only. I tried calling, I tried direct mail, I tried everything, and the only successful tool turned out to be email of all the things I attempted. So I can attest to its power. I don't think it's a resurgence. I think it's always been there. It just doesn't quite.
It's not sexy. It's not sexy. It's something that's always performed, and it's one of the things that's most highly valued. I mean, it's paradoxical because there's so much email and there's so much noise in email, but it's still very effective, and it's but people don't want to talk about it because it's just this thing that's this workhorse that kind of continues on, and it doesn't have the bells and whistles of it.
Doesn't have the shiny object syndrome for sure.
So for me,
meanwhile, everybody's excited about Clubhouse. Is that where you're going, Greg?
No, not at all. Not at all. So on that, you forced me now to talk about it. I mean, if you had been on the call with me and Barry Schwartz and Matt McGee was on that call, Matt is the one who's very involved. And, I mean, I think it's meaningful for these realtors. They have embraced, realtors are a funny group among small businesses, like realtors and lawyers and maybe one or two other categories are really ahead of the curve. Realtors have always been very progressive when it comes to marketing and trying new things. And they're apparently using that, using Clubhouse in ways that are meaningful for them as opposed to just wasting time. I mean, I had sort of dismissed it. Like, oh, it's like this 1950s party line thing, and it's just really a noise. Literally and figuratively, it's just noise. But then I got on the call and I did talk about it, and we were talking about how people are using it, and it was pretty interesting, and I could imagine some specific use cases for it. I mean, it's not something that I want to just hang out on, and I mean, there are people that are just on there all the time, I guess, but it is pretty interesting. It's like a missing networking tool. It's all the virtual events that have taken the place of the live events don't have any viable networking. I mean, there's some novelty things that have been happening, but really that's gone. And that's what people are hungry for. And that's a big motivation for going to conferences. And this isn't necessarily the replacement for that, but it gets closer to that than something like Slack or, I don't know, Zoom breakouts maybe. I mean, I don't know, but it's pretty interesting. And I haven't gotten my brain completely around it. But that's not what I'm going to talk about.
But just a note on that, Matt showed it to me the other day. I joined up. Obviously, they want everybody in my email list and every social network I'm on. They wanted that information. I only shared some of it with them. But Matt is particularly well suited to an audio environment. He was trained in traditional media, and he has an audience built in with realtors. So it's exciting to him because he has everything you need to take off. If I'm going to go there, I have to build a new audience there, right?
Well, it's
difficult.
it's analogous in a way to radio. See, I'm running out of time now. You forced me to talk about this issue that I wasn't going to talk about. It's
I forced you.
No, David forced me. It's analogous in some ways to radio, or existing media that people are familiar with. They're the author who's being interviewed before this big audience, or the radio host and guest, and then the audience. So it's interesting, but we'll see what happens with it.
Do you think it will have? I'm certain that we'll have by this point achieved a escape velocity with its own audience. But do you think that the return to economic normal and in-person events will stunt its growth, or do you think it really is kind of an ongoing thing that people will use regularly?
Well, I think like anything, at a certain point, people will figure out what it's good for, and then and then the sort of the marketers will descend on it and turn it into something, distort it or like suck the life out of it, the exploitation and manipulation. But I think it'll have it. I think it'll continue to have a life. I mean, events, it'll be interesting to see as we sort of go forward, how many virtual events survive, how many live in-person events sort of return. We'll have some kind of mixed landscape, I think, mixed reality. I can't launch into another topic.
You get a do-over.
Yeah.
You get a slot.
Okay, so I'll tell you what I was going to talk about, and then I'll talk about one final thing that's quicker. So I was going to talk about the Apple versus Facebook sort of IDFA deprecation and how that's playing out, and it has a lot of interesting dimensions to it. One of which is Facebook's effort to create its own environment to persuade you to opt in, as opposed to using the Apple kind of pop-up, which has very limited space. So that'll be very interesting to watch to see what happens. Also, the justification of help small businesses, which is essentially implied by their messaging, which is manipulative, I think, and has some truth to it, but is largely manipulative. That's pretty interesting. And then against the backdrop of like the speculation about what are people going to actually do when these messages start showing up, will it be like GDPR or CCPA, where essentially nothing is happening? People are just complacently,
just an extra hurdle for users to
precisely
view content. Yeah,
precisely. Or is it going to be meaningful where people are going to say, I don't want to be tracked? And I wrote the story this morning, or the sort of excerpt about how all the Capitol rioters are being found using their smartphones. Social media and smartphones are the things that are identifying them, and people are just, they know where they live, they know where they've been. It's incredibly revealing, and it's concerning. I mean, I'm all for rounding up the ringleaders, but it's very concerning. And so privacy continues to be a really important ongoing issue. And how consumers, I saw some data this morning that I maybe will include in a subsequent newsletter about how there's a gap between people's recognition of the problem, how what they say to surveys, and then what they actually do, which is the GDPR issue. It's like people are complacent, or they're not making the effort, or they're just not doing anything different, yet they're anxious and concerned. This is sort of the market that we're in right now.
Except for David, who walks around inside a bubble of tinfoil.
That's right. It is true that I have location services disabled for every app until I enable them, including Apple Maps. So,
yeah, I think people genuinely want more control over these things, and they recognize in limited context the value of having that awareness. But it's it's just very people don't know what to do necessarily, or they're complacent, or whatever. It's too much work, whatever it is.
But Apple has certainly gotten to a point of market dominance where they can now drive the conversation to a large extent and help consumers understand what's going on and take the next step. When they first started this marketing campaign around privacy several years ago, I remember David and I had a conversation around it, and it wasn't clear that it would have an impact. And I think they were right in identifying it as a topic, and right in establishing as a corporate sort of value that they could market. And
good long-term bet for sure. I think,
yes,
the stuff is only getting more Orwellian. So even if it's not at the surface yet, it probably will be in the next 5 or 10 years. So.
Well, and I think that they're motivated both by sort of a recognition of the problem, that this is something that they should be addressing, but also there's a self-interested dimension because they don't have to rely on advertising. They're in a position to they can take the high road because they can take it, as opposed to somebody like Google, who apparently is going to do the light or the bad version of what Apple is doing. Right. All right, so I was going to bring up the Apple AR VR mixed reality glasses, whatever, that apparently are going to cost $3,000, and just have some fun with that.
But this is a weekly show, so maybe that's
we can save that for next time.
The second Near Memo.
Exactly. And I will bring into that conversation the Apple Car, which I've been studying recently as well.
Yes, very interesting. Very, very interesting. That's another, like, what are they actually thinking is going to happen kind of topic.
And I'll play the Luddite who wants neither. So as usual.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks very much. And we'll do this again next week. And it was fun.
Thanks for listening, guys.
Thanks.